Can everyone see my screen, right? Perfect. Well, welcome to the second session. It's nice seeing your faces again. And it was also really nice and energizing to end last session and to see kind of the energy and momentum from everyone's brains, I think primarily ticking around thoughts on how to approach things. I hope you all managed to have a bit of time to reflect from last session to also maybe approach some of the homework that I presented last time. If you didn't manage, it's not the end of the world. I know life is busy, but it would be still really good if you haven't managed to still try to aim to do it over the next few days. I'm also going to be introducing some other frameworks today that you can also then take and do kind of the exact same thing. So maybe that's also just like a bit of a, I guess, heads up that in each week we will be sharing some kind of takeaway frameworks and exercises that you can then kind of action out and reflect and think about in your own time. Today's session, we're going to be diving into understanding your customer and developing your value proposition. And again, this is part of the program of crafting your brand for investment. Just a quick recap, because I know time sometimes seems weird. Last time we discussed really your brand is your why and the story, the impact and the values that people perceive. We also discussed the purpose statement and how it describes the most relevant systemic reason why your company exists and who's serving. We also talked about how investors look for narratives, and a compelling brand story helps them understand things like your purpose, your impact potential, and your longevity, potentially even a bit of your traction so far. And then finally, we discussed how it's important to engage with heart, not just head. So your brand story needs to reflect shared values and emotions. Doesn't mean that you're not going to use data or concrete numbers to back things up, but at the same time, actually most decisions are made not logically but emotionally, and so connecting with someone's heart is going to be really important. And that's why even looking at spending time or investing time into things like your brand story is actually really important when it comes to the potential that you can reach if you do have clarity and confidence around that. Before we go into today's session, there is a small icebreaker that I'm planning. So we're just going to be listening to some music, and hopefully everyone can get a piece of paper and a pen or pencil out. And we're just going to be spending 3 minutes to literally draw a bicycle in whatever way. There's no right and wrong. And I would love for you to think about the following question. If the bicycle represented your organization, what part of it would represent you the most, and why? So as you're drawing the bicycle, maybe you can just reflect, am I actually more this part or that part, and why is that so? And even if you're a solopreneur, that also can be fitting, because we still sometimes take characters or hats. Hello. I think we just have a new joiner. Hi, Max. Nice to meet you. Just a quick recap, Max. We just actually started. And I'm just going to quickly go back. So today we're really focusing on understanding your customer and value proposition. And this is part of the crafting your brand for investment kind of program track. The first session, we primarily covered things like your why, your purpose.
Oh, sorry, very sorry. I was here the whole time. I've been here. I've just had my camera off. Sorry, no need. Sorry, apologies. I've been here the whole time.
Perfect. Awesome.
Sorry, you
Well,
can
then we
skip
did
this.
a
I was just
mini.
ready to start drawing with my little pencil. Like, okay, get my camera. I'm ready to go. Sorry.
Great. No worries. Well, then maybe for anyone who missed anything, there's a mini recap. And I guess before I move on to the icebreaker and before we actually get drawing, do we have any questions or thoughts or reflections about the previous session that you maybe want to share? No thoughts or reflections. Memories deleted. Okay, then if that's the case, we can go and get drawing. Seems a bit unfair for me to ask that question after I introduce the exercise, I guess. I hope you can listen to music. This is just going to be some background music. If you are bothered by it, you can just also mute for the next kind of 3 minutes, and I'll wave when we start again.
Sometimes, your burden, it gets so heavy. But I want to let you know this evening, yeah, I want to let you know that if you can just hold on, we ain't gonna have to cry no more. You see, God's gonna wipe away all our tears. We gonna wipe the tears, yeah. We gonna wipe the tears from your eyes. Do you hear me out there?
Okay, just gonna go back here. And I hope everyone managed to draw their bicycle. If you'd like, you can hold it up and share it in front of the camera, and we can do a quick sharing session. Ooh. Very unique and different. I love it. Very cool. Well then, maybe we can do a quick round. Yeah, what part of the bicycle were you in your organization the most, and why? Or what part represented you the most, you felt? Max, do you want to start us off, and then you can throw the ball to whoever next you
Oh,
choose?
wasn't ready for this one. We'll go with the handlebars because without that, there would be no direction.
Thank you so much. Feel free to throw the ball to anyone else in the room.
Okay, Naya.
Hi everyone. I chose the seat because I feel like as a founder, I really carry the load. And that's where the big fat bum sits. So I'm gonna throw the ball to Cecile.
Hey, so I feel like it's the I would say the top here. How do you call it? Sorry, in English, this part, like to guide, to give the direction. Yes.
Steering wheel.
Yes,
handles.
this.
Probably not steering wheel, though. That's more for a call. For the handles more, yeah.
And I'm going to throw the ball to David.
Why did you choose handles, though? What does
Sorry. Why? I feel like you need to have one. If you don't have one, there is no bike. So I feel like it represents everything to be able to move, to do everything you want. So David, if you...
Yeah, so for me, I went with a frame. And then the reason why it's like, I think from my organization, I'm definitely the core. Everyone talks to me. So it's kind of like, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, the first time I did this, thanks so much for sharing, Ron. I chose the pedals because I often get stepped on, but at the same time, because I often create the momentum in my organization. Cool. Well, this was just a short icebreaker. Hopefully, it got us a bit of our last space that we were in, and we can kind of switch our focus. And I'm going to start, like I said, talking about customer segmentation as well as value proposition when it comes to actually how do you best communicate, your positioning towards not only the market, but also how you then integrate that in your fundraising approach and plans. And we're starting with segmentation and the concept of ideal client personas. So let me just quickly put the videos to the side. The first rule of branding is you are not the customer. And this is a quote that I usually like to remind myself on, which is I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think this is kind of just a good framing and setup for what I'm going to be introducing and talking about today. So let's start from your ideal segments and the value you can bring to them. And generally speaking, we have multiple types of segmentation that you can approach. So really segmentation is the breaking down or creating groupings of your market or your audience. And there's different types, or you can approach your segmentation or audience or targeting strategy in different ways, starting with the left here, which is the mass market. Really, you're serving a very, the majority, if you'd like, if not everyone. And companies or organizations that fall under here are, for example, telecommunications companies or banks can often have this segmentation of serving everyone kind of approach. We then have product variety marketing, which is, or segmentation, which is targeting the entire market with different products and marketing mixes. And again, some of those bigger organizations sometimes do that of like, we have the segment that is older and then the younger, and we're creating different types of products and services to suit those different types of segments. We then have the niche marketing, and here's where we're getting more around the earlier staged ventures and organizations and within the startup space. This can also be SMEs would more likely fit under this kind of right side. And it starts with niche marketing. So really, how do we start to target a few well-defined segments of the market? And how can we, instead of trying to reach a huge market, we actually say, well, actually, there's a smaller group here that if we serve, we can have a unique advantage on compared to what's currently in the market, or we can serve them better and there's a need that's not being met in that specific niche. And really how big that niche can also really depend. And often you can, for example, consider a lot of the times geolocation or location in general as one of the ways of how you can niche down. But you can also do that in many different approaches as well. And then on the very right, it's micro niching, and it's really the smallest subgroup that you can focus on, that you can feel like you can really make, be the most valuable kind of brand in that space. And really this reflects around exactly that phrase, right? What is the brand space that you are planning to kind of occupy or take? And so this brings us to the kind of concept of ideal client personas. And ideal client personas are segments of your target market that have the highest level of intent and the highest likelihood to resonate with your purpose and your offering. And so this doesn't mean who are all the people that you could serve, which a lot of the times organizations or founders could often jump into, which is like, oh, we can do this, we can be for that and that and that and that. But actually it's trying to understand who is that small group and you can define how small or big that group is, but what is that realistically small group that you actually have a really high chance of resonating with, that actually have the purchasing power, but also the intent and likelihood to resonate with what you're offering. And this is a really nice graphic to help us kind of understand the importance of being careful when selecting your ideal client personas. Because if you have a bad ideal client persona on the left here, usually you need to put a lot of effort into your marketing. That means there's more friction in the conversion journey, that people that go through getting to know your brand and your offerings, the ones that come through are not maybe resonating and so are doubting more of what you're doing. And there's a lot more friction that's involved and a lot more probably convincing that's even required to actually allow them to go through your brand experience or your offerings, right? It also means that, for example, if your ideal client persona is vague or pretty big, that, and this is why I was giving examples at the start on the left side of that scale in types of targeting, sorry, and niching down, was the telecommunications or the banks, because usually they have huge marketing departments that actually start to target everyone, but start to have much more segmented campaigns and messaging that don't actually always reach everyone, but are more tailored and personalized. So within a context that you're a solopreneur or a small, organization or an earlier staged company, if you're under 10 years old, really, understanding this concept can help you save a lot of effort, but it can also mean that you actually create the traction that you are required to create in the initial years that you wouldn't have normally created if you stuck to this left side of not having a well-defined and well validated, and we'll get to that in a sec, ideal client persona. On the right side, however, if you do get more data around who is that segment or group that really resonates with what you're doing, and the more you can tailor your messaging, your offerings, your services, and really meet their needs more, the less effort you'll need to really put into your marketing and the more reward that you'll get out of that. So we're going to jump into a quick breakout session. And again, I hope people managed to do a bit of the homework from last time. And if you didn't, no worries. We can just use this as almost like a bit of a practice round, and we can just kind of like imagine and improvise on the spot. That's really not a problem. It's really with the purpose of trying to get us to maybe try to think with off these different questions and frameworks. And so you can, again, after this session, maybe take time off and journal and do a bit more of this thinking more concretely. And what we're going to do is we could probably do this actually just in a group. We're going to ask ourselves, what were the common characteristics of the clients that you currently have versus the ones that you want to keep, and the clients that you don't currently have, but you want to acquire. So really that main homework of who is our current clients or customers, and who would be the dream ones that we don't currently have, and which ones are actually not resonating as much with our purpose and offerings. What were the key patterns that you maybe identified, or maybe now in hindsight can identify? Any reflections or patterns within this exercise? And then finally, could you maybe start to craft or maybe share a bit your reflections around who that ideal customer persona is? And it might not be just one, it might be 2 or 3 different segments or groups, but what is that niche and how big is it that you are feeling at the moment in your journey kind of is the most ideal within your audience kind of mix? Those are the questions we're going to ask yourselves, but I'm just going to pause here before we go into a bit of thinking and then a sharing round. Any questions so far around what I've shared, as well as this exercise specifically, or these questions? Maybe another question: who's already come up with the concept of ideal client personas or ICPs?
Yes, I have a product in background in product design.
Cool.
So yeah, user journeys, personas, it's my bag.
Awesome. Then I think we're all going to be excited in hearing the reflections and what you share at the end as well. Hopefully we can pick up a bit of your experience.
Oh no, I've talked too much.
Haha. Anyone else have any experience with ideal client personas, or is this the first time you're encountering them?
When I've had experience, I've tried to do it time and time again, to be honest. I've done it loads of times and I still don't feel like I'm there. But I have done it.
Cool.
Yeah, and I've heard about them, but I've done it a few times, but not recently.
So when you're thinking about currently, how clear can you define your ideal client personas and how confident are you about them? How would you respond to that?
I would respond by saying that I feel like I have a lot of ideal clients. So then I get confused as to where to basically position my canon, because it's like my business is about parents. So it's available to mums, but it's also available to dads. It's available to the nuclear family. It's available to non-nuclear family. There are pros for each different ideal customer. So it's, yeah, without spreading myself thin, sometimes I might alienate someone, which is my struggle point.
Yeah. So I think this diagram is really helpful to think about, and especially when you're comparing the niche versus a micro niche. And because a niche can still be a pretty big segment of a market, right? Are we targeting all parents, or are there actually specific sub-segments there that are still pretty massive, right? And still could mean that we could never reach. So that's where, personalizing it to your own business model is important. But at the same time, if you're clear about what makes most sense to you, that's what's important, right? And then getting validated that it does make sense compared to niching down is also another way to be more confident about that. Any other thoughts? Yes, David.
So I think just like you and I, like we used to be very unclear about what the target customer is. And then I think for us, it basically was just rounds of iteration. So we'll basically do something and then would notice whether or not it's resonating. And then based off that, we could just cut off a whole chunk of like people. And we're like, okay, they're no longer our target customers. Try something else. Okay, that doesn't work with them. And then we slowly narrowed it down to like a customer profile that we kind of know now. But initially it was way too broad. And then, but it's hard to tell, right? And you don't really know who, and you see different people pop up and then you speak to different people. So yeah.
I think that's what you just said, David, is the thing. It's like I'll be in my bag. Like, okay, cool. I'm focused on mums, business mums, career mums, working mums that are leaving their children, blah, 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 blah. And then I'll speak to a dad and they're like, yeah, but this is great for dads because da 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 da. And then I'm like, okay. And then I'll speak to someone else and I'm like, this is great for co-parents because da 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 da. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know which one to focus on first. Do you know what I mean? Like,
so what we did was we basically had decision points. And then it could be like, so for example, one of them for us was like, we're going for like bigger companies versus smaller companies. And then if we go into a program, it would have been easier to access the bigger companies. So when we didn't get onto the program, we just cut them off and we're like small companies now. And then so just having kind of decision and be like, okay, cool. If like, if we see this, then we go for this ones. If we don't see it, then we go for this ones instead. And then it kind of helps you, So that's what we did.
I think there's also two levels of it, right? So the three questions I usually like to ask is, which ones are we going to prioritize? Which ones are we going to include but not prioritize? And which ones are we going to exclude? Right? Because just because you're tailoring your communications, your positioning, your marketing, your value proposition, your tone of voice towards business moms, it doesn't mean that you don't accept, moms on a sabbatical. Or maybe that's not even a good example. Mom, stay-at-home moms. But it means that you're prioritizing tailoring. What channels are you going to use to market? What, where are you going to focus your energy towards? It's really a utilization of energy. That's how we say it. And I think what David really pointed out really nicely is the best way to do it is actually to experiment. And especially at the start, you can often start broad, but then you kind of go niche-er, and then you sometimes, the bigger you get, then you actually maybe have more opportunities to even go broader again, right? Any other thoughts about how clear you are about your ideal client personas?
Hi, I'm Stacy. My first time in the group.
Hi, Stacy.
So I missed out on last week because the Zoom wasn't working for some reason. So just a quick introduction. I'm the director for Stacy's Kitchen Limited, a Caribbean catering company. When I just started out, I used the Yell. This was this advertising company that I used. I didn't know anything about marketing or whatsoever. So they did my advertisement via PPC advertisement. So I offer Caribbean catering services to like corporate companies, weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, but most of what the PPC advertisement brought to me, the conversions was mostly corporate companies, provided authentic Caribbean company. But as I'm looking and I speak to people, it's very broad broad niche to really figure out which one is the ideal, but more majority was the corporate company. So I think I would go for the corporate company side of catering.
I love that. And that was actually going to lead me to, that was a perfect transition really to one point, which is one of the best places to start with as well is to look at your existing clients or existing data. For example, if you have any, ads launched. So that was a really perfect example there. So through these data, that's a way to start to validate. And that's why I was saying before, are you confident and do you have any validation? What does validation look like? And again, we'll get into that actually at the very end and I'm going to give also an exercise at the end for you to help you start to validate some of your key hypotheses. But it's about, do you talk to a few of those different segments and are you collecting, just feedback around, are they resonating with what you're doing and do they have the needs that you think that you thought they had? And are you actually better to, are they, for example, willing to invest in deeper relationship with you as a brand or rather not? And do you start to see differences between these different segments, right? Another way is like was just mentioned right now. So having maybe online ads. And I think that's probably one of the best strategic reasons an earlier stage company should have online ads is probably to generate quick learnings around what types of audience segments or groups actually resonate more with what type of messages. So that's another really smart way to actually validate some of the interest around different or compare at least the interest between different groups of audiences. Other ways is also research. Research as well. So direct research that you can create yourself, but also maybe existing research that you could look up and find some, recent data that can support, validate some of your key hypotheses. But those are all ways you can actually validate that. And then again, the easiest way is to just look at if you're already been in business for a while, is to look at your existing client and customer base from the past few years and just try to think what are the actual 20 to 30% of customers that have, shown the most interest, shown the most trust, shown the most energy and engagement, maybe have return purchased stuff, so have, been a return customer. What do they have in common? That's 20% of your audience that is most engaged. And often those types of questions, and when you start to look at those 20%, it's when you start to get some sparks of like, oh, wait, actually, there's something here. They all have this and this in common. And we can start to create a grouping there that maybe we didn't think of even before. With that, then I'm going to switch it over to you all. I'm going to be more of a spectator. I'm going to put a timer on for about 5 minutes as we have already kind of started to think and discuss about this. And the questions you're going to ask and really present to each other is what were the common characteristics or what are the common characteristics of these clients that you currently have, the 20% or 30% that you really want to keep, that you feel there's most trust engagement with, most resonance, and the clients that you currently have, or that you don't currently have, but want to acquire. And if you had to describe your ideal client persona, so I get connected to this conversation just now, who would they be? And again, even if you have multiple ones, you can still start to reflect on this. Whoever wants to share first, you can just unmute yourself and then we'll just do passing the ball afterwards as well. And if you need a minute to just think about it as well, that's also totally fine. So whenever you're ready, you can just unmute.
A prepared client.
Say that again.
A prepared client. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, I can hear you. Am I prepared, did you say?
A prepared client. Because I work in the website space and a client sometimes comes with like a million questions. It's hard to sometimes understand what they want versus a client that does, you have to direct them a lot. That's what I mean.
Right, a prepared client, someone who's prepared. Okay. Is that a question or is that who you would define as your ideal client persona?
That's one characteristic of a good characteristic.
Well, it's the characteristic.
I would say a client that will stand with their business values, that understand their business values.
Okay. So who is aware of their business values?
Yeah.
I can go next. So for us, it's actually very specific. So the ones our deal costs, the kind of like the ones that we have and we want to keep are insurance brokers with less than 50 employees. So we're looking for the ones that have more, like the ones we prefer, the ones that have more than 6 employees, or more than 5 employees, but less than 50. They actually tend to be very, so the things characteristics they have in common is like they tend to actually be very male dominated organizations. The ones we like are tech literate. Yeah, so that those were the ones I have. Oh, and then for us, they tend to do a very specific type of insurance. So they tend to do one of 3 types of insurance, and then those 3, if they do one of those, then we tend to score really highly with them. And then in terms of the customers we don't currently have but want to acquire, what we've discovered is like most of the brokers tend to be parts of like either clubs or networks. So what we want to try and do now is go for those networks, because by going for them, we get a range of brokers rather than just one broker, and then it just makes our marketing easier.
Cool, lovely. Well, seems like you put a lot of thought into that. And it seems like, yeah, you're going very actually micro into the way you're segmenting now, which is really great, with especially initial validation as well on what's working. Lovely. Anyone else want to share?
I'm happy to go next. Some of the characteristics are mums that are happy to delegate, that don't want to do all the work themselves. Mums that want to raise financially independent children, that have a keen interest in teaching them about money. Mums that are not scared to tell their kids to bog off because they are carving time out for themselves. That's probably some of mine.
Well, so I'm hearing also busy mums that are, yeah, get frustrated.
It is, and it's like the mum that is searching for an assistant that is gonna, but happy to let go, because a lot of mums don't really want to let go. They want to do everything themselves and then complain that they're doing everything themselves. So
Right.
this type of mum has to be system focused and understand that delegation is key.
All right. Yeah. Interesting. So you're not going after control mums, which is probably okay. So you already have a negative segment, which is great. Anyone else want to share? If no one else wants to share, then we can move on, unless anyone has any final questions just about this ideal client persona. We are going to continue the conversation around, what we do next after we select those 1 or 2 key personas. Cool. Then, well, we've selected our personas. And the first thing we do after we select our personas, even if we are taking this as an assumption, because often when we're doing this for the first time properly, or even the second, third time, we don't have much data to validate these things, straight away. And so that's something that we just be aware of, and we can still take assumptions at this stage. And it's still better to take assumptions than not to do this reflective, thinking at all. But we just keep that in mind, that if we don't have data, that's fine. We're going to take these assumptions, and we might go and change this at a later stage if it doesn't work out, right? So it's this kind of learning, kind of open to failure and pivoting mindset. So empathy mapping helps, and this is really introducing the first framework of today after this concept of ideal client persona. It's helping us to understand our ideal customer personas by visualizing and helping us think about what are they actually thinking, feeling, saying, and doing. And this helps us to really just place ourselves more in their shoes. So this is actually the first exercise as well that I'm gonna direct everyone's attention to. I'm also gonna share this link in a second. And what we're actually gonna do is yeah, I think we can use one board just because we're also a small group right now. I know, Stacey, you're on your phone, so you can feel free to think about it. And when we do a bit of a sharing, you can also share just your thoughts. You can also skip this section if you'd feel more comfortable doing that. But as soon as we get into the mirror board for whoever can, we're just going to zoom into this yellow space here, this empathy board. And it's exactly what I just explained before, right? It's when we actually start to define, okay, I know that we're having this busy mom in the city with at least 2 childs kind of persona in my head, for example. We then start to ask ourselves, well, what would this persona hear? And of course, when we're saying what do they hear, we're not saying, every minute of their life, what are they hearing? But it is related to really the offering and the space that we're taking, right? So we're, for example, helping them manage their schedules, for example, then in that sense, it's about schedules, it's about managing time, it's about what do they hear, right? And this can be, what do they hear from others? What do they hear from their kids? What do they hear from their mothers and dads? What do they hear from their friends? What do they hear from their neighbors and colleagues? What do they even hear on their podcast apps? And what do they hear on YouTube or other channels that they're consuming? So what are the things that are really going in their ears that's relevant to the topic that we're addressing here? The next question we ask ourselves is, well, what would this persona see? So what do they see in the marketplace? For example, how do they see people try to fix this problem or address the topic that they're thinking about? What do they see in their immediate environment? So are they seeing that other parents are continuously testing out new apps and they're literally seeing those apps open up in front of them? What are they watching and reading? So are they actually reading specific books or seeing specific documentaries or movies that are helping them or informing them or, again, basically influencing their thoughts about this specific topic? We're then going to think about, what does this persona think and feel? So now we're looking more inwards. What would they maybe think and how would they feel about it? What have they observed around the problems that you're intending to solve, and what have they observed around the solutions that already exist? So now it's more like, what judgments are they making and how are these making them feel? And then finally, what do they actually say and do? So what would they say to their friends, to their family, to their kids, to their colleagues, to maybe strangers about this specific topic? And what would they tell them, other people around the ecosystem and existing players? What would they do in relation to the problem? So would they actually do certain things? If they're trying to learn a new language, are they actually, placing 10 minutes a day aside to actually practice that language? Or are they buying actively a new journal so they could start to practice that new language? What actions or decisions are they taking? And that's what we're going to focus on for this section. So just kind of brainstorming for your own ideal client persona. You can kind of take your own colored sticky note. Ideally, everyone would have their own unique sticky note. So feel free to, whoever is able to join, of course. Again, if you're not joining on Miro, you can still ask these questions to yourself and you can start to imagine it. And if you want, you can share a bit as well. We're going to do like the sharing one box at a time. And we're just going to start with what the persona hears. So we're just going to dive right into it just to try this out. It might feel a bit scary at the start, but I think also when seeing what other people would write, it can often help us spark ideas. Any questions before we start? Has anyone done this empathy mapping exercise before? And I'll assume...
I was going to ask the question. So, when it says what they hear, is it like kind of like Would it be like, oh, this are the newspapers they listen to, or would that count under that?
Wait, say that again.
Would the newspapers they listen to count under that?
Sorry, your mic just found something listen to.
Sorry, is the mic plugged in? It should be. Okay, cool. Maybe I need to raise volume. Is this better?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, cool. All right, volume was low. All right. So in terms of what they hear, would that also count as what the newspapers they listen to, like what conferences they go to, stuff like that?
Not newspapers, because they don't hear the newspapers.
Oh, okay, well, I see. Cool.
But they would listen to their podcast or to the radio.
Cool.
And they would also hear just their surrounding people in their life talk to them. So it's really anything that goes through the ears, including that radio or yeah. And I'm just going to put 2 minutes to the clock. And in those 2 minutes, we're just going to try to come up with as many kind of sticky notes. You could even put things in quotation marks, right? If you'd like. What are they hearing and by whom are they hearing it, or from whom? And I'm going to put some music with the timer as well. Okay, we'll do a quick pause and just quickly zoom out before we put a bit more time on this. And so you can come up with a bit more tickets as well afterwards. But maybe we could just quickly zoom out and we can share the first initial tickets that we wrote and see if we could already see how different people maybe approach this exercise. Anyone want to start?
I think Max should start because he's an expert.
No, nice showing the ball.
I mean, promise was like, okay, fine. But I literally only filled in the first 2 boxes as well, so that's just terrible. Right, but I put on the persona here's. Again, it's typical for our clients would be something like there'd be a marketing director or some sort of C-suite marketing director, and they'd be saying something like, we just got a new website, great. They're talking to their colleagues in the pub, like we got a new website, generating loads of new traffic, great. And then the persona, other friend goes, great, where did you get that website? That's one of them, something. Another one angle might be a friend. They just say some people like a branded website for themselves, and they might get a compliment from a friend about the brand suits their style, something like that.
Cool.
And that's about as far as I got. Sorry, guys.
Awesome. Thank you. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. So for me, like in terms of what they hear, they tend to talk to other brokers. They attend broker events. So they have like special events for brokers, and then there's like 2 big organizations that cater towards them. In terms of what they see, so like they go to conferences to check out like what's tech on the market. They also see like one of our competitors like e-trading platforms, so they see that too. And then around what it thinks and feels, that's where I got really into it. So, so one of the things we kind of discovered with them was like for them the pain is like feeling from suck, but they really feel the pain. And then when we say that, it really resonates with them. So it's clear that's what they think. It's also interesting because they say they find it time consuming, but whenever we ask them about it, they say, "Oh, I do it really fast." So I think there's kind of like a bit where it's kind of like, "Oh, one of us seem to be good at our job, so we do it fast." It's something they're trying to avoid, but they're obligated to do it at times by regulation. They're like in a regulated industry, so they're very careful about what they do say. So they're brokers, so they work with insurers, and then they dislike some insurers, but they won't say it out loud because that's just bad for business. And then in terms of like what they say and does, I've got so far just attend events.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty impressive how you filled out all those boxes. Well done. Thank you so much for sharing. And maybe just to quickly zoom out just from the first 2 shares that we got, I think one thing I'd love to pick up from how Max shared is I love the style how he literally quoted, what someone would literally say that would be heard, right? It's almost like this quote. And it really helps us to get into, again, that person's mind more, to see the world from their point of view a bit more. I also really loved, David, how you kind of thought about like the where. So like where they like what's the channel if you'd like of where they're getting this sounds from and information that they're hearing. Who wants to go next? Cecile? You want to go next? Ooh, you're muted.
Okay, so
Perfect.
sorry. So for me, so the first post-it is where it's mostly from colleagues or during events. And so the feedback I have is like I'm live for your fruits because I'm selling exotic fruits. So most of people are really happy to see different type of fruits and because it's like weird shapes, I always try to make the basket different for them, and so it's always like a surprise. And then sorry, I was just able to put so it's like it's colorful and it's a nice display of weird fruit. So it's like a conversation opener for people. Yes.
Lovely.
So sorry, didn't put much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Well, let's go next.
I'm happy to go next. I only managed to do the first quarter. So the persona here is friends and family talking about being overwhelmed and exhausted. At work, they'll be hearing colleagues talk about the struggles that the work and life balance challenge and the fear of not getting promoted because they have kids, which makes them be unreliable. And then from like the YouTubers or like podcasters, they'll be hearing conversations about the mental load that parents carry. That's as far as I got.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. Have we gone through everyone? Stacey, I know.
I would say value for money in the sense where whenever I do a catering, then what they would normally get, they would be leftover food. Other than when the food is finished, they would have extras remaining overs. And I said fresh, authentic food, one of the best curry goats they ever had. That's the second one.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing. I have 2 high-level perspectives, or if you'd like, feedback points I'd like to give the group. And I'd love for us to actually do this exercise one more time and put actually, we're going to put 5 minutes to then go over the rest of the whole board. But the feedback, and I'd love for you all to kind of take this, like listen to this feedback and see how you can carry this forward when you go in the second round. One is, let's make the quotations bit. Let's really try to visualize in more sense, really the sentence that would be heard, right? So it's really like visualize in that sense. So imagine like you're literally hearing it and you're journaling it down, what you're hearing from that person. And with that notion, I'd love for us to also take a step back from our product and offering. Because I feel like a common trend I've also realized in the whole group is that we're thinking about when are they hearing about my product? And maybe less so, what are they hearing about the topic of parenthood, for example, or the topic of maybe fruits or exotic fruits in general, right? Or what are when we're thinking even about the core needs that they may have, like having website goals or wanting to acquire customers. So it's going that one step back from our products and one step closer to them and our external environment. So it's really not about our products or our offerings at this minute. It's more around the themes and topics that people are thinking about that are relevant to our brand space, or the systemic problem that we're addressing, or the pain points or core needs that we're addressing. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to put, like I said, 5 minutes to the clock, because that's also something that you can also carry forward, like I said, in the other sections. Even if you filled everything out, I would also love for you to think about this in a more detailed approach. So how can you go one level more in depth and really add multiple types of ways that it could be heard, for example? Because all of that, it helps you build this character that you can then better personalize your communications towards. And with that, I'm going to put 5 minutes to the clock. Hey, drop your pens. We're not gonna share everything in detail now, just because we also have a couple more exercises to go through for this session. But I'd love to maybe just get one or two comments around that second round, how it felt, if you've maybe approached it any differently to the first one, if anything came up in something that you wrote that you maybe didn't think about so far.
I can go. So I started chucking some images because I was like, this is what I see. So that was actually pretty fun.
I saw that. Lovely. One more person, anyone want to share any reflections from the second round?
I liked actually putting the sentences in to actually hear the person saying what they're actually struggling with or what the conversations are like, because I'm a mum myself. I've traveled through a lot of them, so it felt very relatable in that respect. I don't know if I've done it right though, but from what I think I've done. So.
I think you did. I saw yours. I really resonated with the ones that you wrote. It made sense. And that's the whole point of, writing those in quotes. It also helps you kind of, again, put yourself more in their shoes and put your own identity maybe aside for a second. Even if it is someone that you could even relate to in the past, it's like you're still seeing it from their kind of point of shoes. Cool. Well, what I'm going to do actually now is we're going to take a quick 5-minute break and we're going to come back and dive into the next exercise, which is directly related to this one and very similar. It's just like an extension version of that. So we're going to take 5 minutes, just maybe stand up, get a bit of fresh air maybe, or a cup of water, and then we're going to come back. And like I said, we're going to do an exercise, then go back to final kind of wrap up on theory. So at 8 past, we'll see everyone. See you soon. She's not wasting any second. Welcome, welcome. Feel free to keep your Miro boards open. I'm just going to quickly switch back to the slide deck, but we'll jump back right into the Miro board in a second. Just going to give last minute for anyone to join. So really, what we just did right now was, like I mentioned, called the empathy map. And what you can also do after the session is also go into what pains does the persona face, what the persona wants, and what the persona needs. And just having clear understanding of those also will really help you to A, understand what can you start to validate, and B, how can you start to position yourself and craft your positioning and your offerings and your messaging more in a more tailored kind of experience. And after we do the empathy mapping and we reveal what the ideal client persona thinks, feels, experiences, then we can actually jump into the second section, which is the jobs to be done framework. And that can be the next step to dig deeper into why those experiences matter. So using the insights from the empathy maps, we want to clarify the actual jobs that customers want done. And this is where we start to get more kind of relevant to what we're actually offering. What are the core triggers, the core actions and jobs that they have on their to-do list that they're actually trying to achieve or have as an outcome. And this is really important because this then helps us connect the higher level kind of empathy map with really how we can best serve them and what type of kind of mindsets they are in. So the jobs to be done is a tool that can help you focus on user customers rather than features. And that means when you start to explain how you're offering your offers, your services, your products, it's less about what you have, but it's more about what you can solve in their life. So jobs to be done, identify the underlying tasks ideal client personas are purchasing the product or service to accomplish, focusing on their goals and functional, emotional, and social needs. It helps us uncover why customers make decisions and guides innovation to address those core jobs effectively. So we need to always kind of go back to even what are we even offering and go back to these jobs to be done to really understand, are we helping them really with their desired outcome? And this is the exercise that I'd love for us to jump into, and it's a part of the same board. So you can stay in the same board, but this time just scroll a bit down. And really how we want to start to think about the jobs to be done, it's split into 4 different sections, starting with the context. So what is the background to understand where and when this job is happening? So an example could be, I am working remotely. The job is the actual task that the user wants to complete. So a laptop or an outcome could also be, not necessarily a task, but a job is like a project or a job. Or even a characteristic, if you'd like, of my lifestyle. So a laptop with a battery that can last a full workday. Motivation is the core reason behind your user's need to complete this job. So the main reason for me is that I can take my laptop with me and work from anywhere, even if I want to be more specific there, and it helps me feel like I can be productive whilst also enjoying my freedom. Then the outcome would be the eventual result when the user has successfully completed that job. So an example here is I can be productive and do my work outside the office. This is just an example, the one I just painted here. It's a very simple one, and it's just one that can help you understand how you can start to use this framework. There are multiple boards here. So what I'd love for you to do is just to take the next board that you can find, the first free one. You can also maybe do a sticky note at the top to add your name. And what we're going to do is just spend about 5 minutes to start to fill out for your own ideal client persona. What is that most relevant context where those tasks or jobs would pop up that you could start to think about what would motivate them and what their desired outcome would be when it comes to how you can also best serve your solution or service or offering. And really what we're trying to get is when a specific context, I want to do a specific job because I am motivated for a specific reason, so I can achieve my final outcome. This is almost a jobs to be done statement, which is kind of the result of what you're doing here. Now, important thing is it's not usually just one job to be done, right? There's usually multiple ones that can be relevant to what you're offering. So what I'd love for you to think about is what are the 3, maybe 4 most important jobs to be done that matter the most for your ideal client persona and in the relevance of what you're offering. What you can do next, and we're not going to do this now, this is kind of more of a homework exercise, is after you do that, you can then start to think, well, how can we actually help them? And how can we start to reframe our core solution, so what we're actually offering to them, our unique advantage, as well as our core value, or the core value that they can get from our services or offerings in relation to these jobs to be done and in relation to the empathy map that we created. That's kind of the next step after this jobs to be done exercise. But what we're going to do now is we're just going to do, like I said, 5 minutes on the clock, and we're going to focus on creating the most relevant 3 to 5 and really try to go in as much depth and detail as possible. Any questions? Awesome. I see everyone's already on their board. Make sure to also add a sticky note in the top for your name. And I'm gonna put the timer on. Please do make sure you have your own unique board, by the way. There are multiple ones next to each other.
I think there's only 3 boards.
Ooh, I'm going to delete the example one, so feel free to take the first one. How did everyone find that? Would you benefit from an additional minute or two?
I could do an extra couple minutes.
Anyone else? Yeah. Okay. We'll do 2 minutes on the clock then. All right. I've seen, I think everyone has filled at least one job to be done, which is really great. Before we move on, maybe one or two people would like to share. Who would like to share theirs? Maybe just also share generally how it felt going over that.
I can go first. So I've done jobs to be done before, so I'm familiar with the framework, so that was good. So in terms of R1, it was so it's basically so when trying to find insurance for a customer, I want to be able to get multiple quotes for the customer because I am required by the regulator to give them multiple quotes. And then also I want to find the best offer for my client that meets the needs. And then the outcome they're looking for is so they can sell the insurance policy and make some money because the insurance broker is the middleman. And then also to win to the client's trust.
Oh, thank you so much. Any reflections or thoughts by yourself, David, or anyone listening as well? Anything that you've picked up on how David approached it?
So I think a job suit honestly is a good framework for like thinking about what they need to do. And then it then helps you think, okay, this is what they're trying to do. And then I also like the context bit around it, which is kind of like, it helps you understand where the problem you're solving fits within the entire flow rather than just the problem.
Can you remind me, David, who that main customer is again?
Insurance brokers.
Insurance brokers. Okay. So really the trigger is trying to find insurance for a customer. So context, maybe we could even think about a customer got in touch with us asking for a new insurance policy or something like that. Yep. Cool. One challenge I would have, or one invitation, David, is how can you think about different contexts and different jobs as well? Because this does feel very directly connected to kind of having that direct need for your service. But I'd love to also think about it in a more, what are the other ones that are maybe less obvious?
But I think for us, I mean, what we did, we did several different jobs we've done, and then we focused
already
in on
validated.
one, and then we
Cool.
come up with a product around that. So if it makes so the other ones don't really make sense because we've thrown them out. We were like, this doesn't matter. If that makes
Cool.
sense.
Lovely. That does make sense. If it's validated, then for sure, that's great. Then. Anyone else want to share before we move on?
I'd like to share just because I don't know if I've done it very well, so I would like some feedback. So I done my context as in like, so I kind of described the context like that, but I don't know if I've done it right. So I put like, it's been a long day, school run twice, the persons had done their day job, they've done after school clubs and all the rest of it. And they've just had no time. So they're completely out of time to do anything for themselves. And then I went on the jobs that they want to do is they want to simplify their daily routine, share responsibilities, and still see a child's progress, even though when they're not present. The motivation that I came up with is because health is wealth. And the mum doesn't get time to carve out any time for themselves, which makes them unhappy, which makes the household tense, and then everyone's unhappy. And the outcome is for her to feel less stressed, spend more time with the family, but make sure that everyone has their own independence at the same time. But after hearing David's, I didn't know whether or not I've gone too vague. Because obviously I have done mine. There's a plethora of things that could possibly come in to help somebody who is feeling like this. So yeah, that's why I wanted to know, am I in the right lane or have I gone too stretched?
I'll say yours is more specific than mine.
Say that again?
I'll say yours is more specific than mine.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like it's more detailed for sure, which I really love. So I think you've done a lot right. I love the amount of detail you've thought into how the people are also feeling at each stages and how they would think about it in specificity. I think that's really where I see that. One challenge I have is just the jump between the context and the job. And this is where maybe I'm lacking how is this connected with this, right? So are they actively thinking about this when they're thinking about this? Or is it maybe the morning after when they're reflecting about the day? Or is it the Sunday when they just went to, so like that's maybe
when it gets to the end of the day. So it's like you've done the long list of things and then you're thinking, wow, I didn't even get to do nothing for myself today. But then by the time the morning comes, you're back in the rat race again. So there's just no time to even think until like the end of the day.
Okay.
So how would I do my context better?
So I guess my question is, and maybe you are right? It might be that's the best type of context. For me, I almost felt like this was a meta context. And then I'm thinking, well, when are they actually thinking about this, right? When are they proactively working on simplifying my daily routine? And it might be on that night. I'm not too sure. I'm not a parent myself, and I don't have research in that audience per se, aside of maybe my sister and some friends. So I guess maybe even from my pre-knowledge of my sister being shattered in that stage, and she often like struggles to make the decisions and to plan ahead about her health in that moment. Maybe that's why I was kind of thinking, is that the actual context in the moment where someone would have that proactive job on their to-do list? Or are there other moments? I'm not sure.
I feel like it's at the burnout moment, but then what happens is you just get caught back in a cycle because you just haven't been presented with a solution. So it's just, okay, cool, go. Because in the morning, your kid don't care that you've just had burnout and had this crisis. They've got to get to school and you've got to get them to school. And then you've got to get to your job or your career or do your own business. So I don't know. So
you're saying that moment of burnout during the night is actually
I think it's at this time now. I think it's right at this time now is the time when it happens. Like when you said 8 minutes, in that time I hung out a load of washing, I put another wash on, and I made myself a cup of tea because I knew that the time didn't go. Like, do you know what I mean? So it's like in that moment, it's like, what can I do like to alleviate this? Like so. Well, what can I do? What can I do to change this?
But maybe the job to be done is to find more time for yourself.
Yeah, it is. It is. But when in the context, when does that happen? is there one specific time, or is this just every mum has their own tipping point of burnout that says enough is enough, I'm not going to do this anymore? I don't know.
So to be honest, I don't have the answer to that, but at the same time, I would say, and again, unless you have it validated, what are the other potential contexts that are most likely, right? And ideally, how can you then, and we'll get to that at the very end as well of the session with the last exercise that I'll share that everyone can also just start to think about after the session, which is how can we start to validate these? And if you don't have them validated, then sticking to one context is then maybe also not the best solution there. Having 2, 3, maybe even up to 4 or 5 different contexts and different jobs to be done or similar ones is then also important, right? So this might be it. I'm not saying I don't have the right data to really tell you or knowledge in this to tell you if it's right or wrong. I think it was just an instinctual more because when I read it, it felt like, oh, I'm really, really stressed. And then it's like, oh, but I'm actively thinking about a solution. It might be. My initial instinct just felt like it was a bit disconnected from an emotional kind of, so.
No, but I think I understand it. Now you say it like that, I understand the movement that you want in the flow. Okay. So yeah, you're right. Like if you're so stressed out, you're not going to think, oh my God, let me simplify. It doesn't work like that. It's something that happens. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Exactly. So this might be the micro context. This is generally the day-to-day, how it feels. But then maybe actually on a Sunday when when your husband is taking the kids and you actually have a few hours to yourself and you finally decide to journal, that's when I have active Sean. It's like the epiphany, or it's like when you're prioritizing that specific job. I'll give you an example for Cecile's, because Cecilia, I'm understanding from what I read around yours is around, it's a gifting item primarily, right? So I'll give you an example for that. There could be a deadline coming up. It's Christmas. It's actually a very relevant one. I am literally thinking about gifts to buy my employees and partners. Like literally today, I had a meeting about it, and I'm like trying to look for the best supplier, and I have a deadline. So that's the context. The context is not that I love to gift people. That's the meta context. That's my day-to-day of like what I believe. But actually, the more specific context is in 10 days, I have a deadline, and there's that date coming up to me, and therefore I have a very strict job that I need to finish, which is to get that done off my to-do list and order that gift, and ideally make sure it's representing what we believe in as well. But that's kind of a specific context, right? It's like 2 weeks before that date. Very specific in that sense. So actually everything else that you wrote feels really specific, which I love, but I just felt there was a bit of a jump from that first context to the job.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any last comments before we move on? Well, I hope that was a bit helpful in just helping us frame 2 elements, right? It was the empathy mapping. So understanding who our ideal client personas are, what are the niche groups of segments that really matter the most for our current or upcoming stage of our growth. And then it's trying to understand, who are they? As in, like, what is their environment? What do they hear? What do they think? What do they do? What do they say when it comes to the context, the problem we're solving? Then we start to do these jobs to be done. And again, ideally, you have 3 or 4 initially, unless you have them validated, then great. But you can start to actually pick, the most relevant ones for those. And that's, if you have that validated, or if you know that this is true for your clients, then you're equipped really to be way more hyper-personalized in all of your messaging, all of your positioning, understanding where to reach your clients, when to reach your clients, in the most appropriate and best times, right? So I guess a quick reflection before I move on, which is, which section of that jobs to be done was actually the hardest for us, or maybe we found most challenging? And we're going to skip the next one because we only actually just did one, so we're not going to focus on the second question. So maybe just before we move on a high level, yeah, which section of those do you feel was the most challenging, and why? Maybe Cecilia, because you didn't talk last time, you can kick us off.
I was thinking about what you said. I think the context for me, because I feel like it's difficult to know when they will need me. because most of my clients for now is like they have like regular orders, so like weekly orders. So if I want to have like to go into gifting, then I need to be open to expect orders at any time. If that makes sense, yeah. Do you want me to add something else? Or?
No, thank you so much. So I agree, by the way. I think the context is usually always the hardest for me as well, to really define and understand. And I find actually sometimes I discover new contexts just speaking to my clients. And they're really asking them, actually, before you sent us that email, what was going on in your mind and what was happening around you and what was that kind of need that arose? Or sometimes just like really what gave you the motivation. So even just asking those questions to existing clients or customers in retrospect can sometimes even give you some contexts that you weren't even aware of. And that was something that I got really surprised by.
Okay, let me try. Thank you.
Anyone else want to share? What did you find challenging? Which one from those 4 sections?
I kind of found it all challenging. I found it, do you know what I'm finding now, even just sitting here, like going through the last bit, is just where in my customer journey, how do I get them to realize that there is a solution? Because me sitting down and thinking about the average idle customer, which is my average working mum, they're just never going to think they're going to be able to carve out time for themselves. I just don't, it's like, I have, but how do I convey that to them? And then how do I find out at what point are they going to be ready for change? I don't know that part. And by doing the last exercise, it shows that I don't know that part, because obviously I had the scenario and the feeling and the where it's uncomfortable. And then I jump straight to, but this is what you need. But when does the person realize this is what I need? I know when I realized, but is that because I'm just, I don't know, am I different or is it different for everyone? That's something that I've got to kind of figure out. So that's the most challenging part with.
Oh, sorry, can I add something to that? Because like I think I had the same problem you had like 2 years ago, where we just didn't like and then I think part of it might be when you got too many customer personas, it's really, and then you're trying to work out the average of it, but they're so different that it just doesn't work. So what actually helped for me was thinking about a specific person and then doing it for a specific person and being like, okay, so this is someone I met called X. This is what they told me. Based on that, this is what I can work out from it. And then also, even if for 10 different people, you start to see the patterns and you're like, oh, maybe we can subdivide them into different categories.
Okay, that's a really good tip. Thank you, David.
So really it's that, and I think this is also one of the purposes we share these exercises in these sessions, right? It's a lot of it is to help you even realize where are the gaps, right? Because if you go back to what I was saying before, most of the times these are still all assumptions. And it's okay. Assumptions are better than not having anything, because assumptions will actually bring you and give you momentum in a specific direction. However, we need to recognize if we actually don't know and we recognize gaps, it's exactly what David says. And it's something that sadly, it often feels so foreign to us as people running organizations and as marketeers are even often like promoting and communicating to audiences. It's like, let's actually just talk to like 5 to 10 people. And let's just make sure we collect what they answer. And let's make sure we actually ask them in a non-biased way. And we think about what we ask them. And after we talk to usually 10 people, it already becomes quite clear what the patterns and trends are. And especially like David said, if we already have 1 or 2 or 3 core niches or segment groups, ideal personas that we know we have some initial traction or reason that they are most to resonate. I'm going to move on to position statements, because this is really, once you validate, and I'm going to again at the very end share what I'd advise you to do on how to start validating and really start setting up something called customer interviews or user interviews as well, or human interviews if you'd like. It's just structured interviews around, that you can repeat and make sure that you're collecting valid data around to make fair and insightful data-driven conclusions. so that the next time you fill that exercise, you can actually be a bit more like David and be like, oh yeah, we did that a few years ago, and I'm pretty confident that this is actually what matters to us. Now, importantly, is you can become overly
I like to
confident.
point out that was like 2 years of pain, but yes.
Yes, I love it. It's a case study in life. One risk is that we believe that we continuously know it and neglect talking to our customers over time. So that's also something that's always important to understand, that the environment that we're serving is also dynamic. So we have to continuously be in conversation with our niches and audiences. And also trends could also mean that new opportunities and new niches would arise, or new needs within that niches also would arise. But really, if we have that foundational understanding of our target audience and our ideal client personas, then we get into things like thinking about how can we best position ourselves. And this is where we transform that internal foundational knowledge into external communications. So I want to introduce you to the concept of a positioning statement. A positioning statement is the pitch of your value proposition. It's the written statement that encapsulates the main value of your product or service and how your solution should get perceived by specific audience segments. So there's usually three things that we usually would say on what would make a really great positioning statement. Number one is that it has strong value, and has deep customer understanding. So this takes time. As we just said a sec ago, we would usually advise for you to validate whatever that we assumed over the past few slides, because most of the times, if we really are critical with ourselves, if we haven't done some clear validation method, then we are actually assuming things and are leaving it a lot to chance. So the faster we can start to systemically validate and create hypothesis-led interviews or surveys, or ideally the combination of the two, the better. But obviously we have to start from a focused place, because asking or getting into an interview with someone, just asking them generic questions will not actually give you the right data to help you make the right decisions. And that's why we start with our assumptions of who would be ideal and what are they really thinking about and what are the core jobs to be done, because then we can start to craft some of our questions based on those. Number two is value proposition that comes from owning your own brand space. So that means, how can we not think about ourselves as being the fiercest competitor in the market, but rather someone that is creating a whole unique brand space and is complementing others in the space. And that shifts a bit on how we look at competitiveness in the market, and can really start to elevate the value of your brand, because at the end of the day, you're not competing against those other 3 or 4 brands, but you're being so unique and developing something so complementary that, you know, you're unique, that you're actually more valuable, and sometimes doesn't even mean that you need to compare the pricing with the other competitors, for example. And then finally, it's your product is complex and you want to say it, you just want to say all the great things about it. But a good value proposition only focuses on one hyper-focused value that you know, or ideally have validated, matters most to your audience. So this is an example of a formula that people can start to use for a value proposition, which is, sorry, it's actually not value proposition, it should say positioning statement. Let me just correct that. And the formula kind of goes like this. So insert for specific ideal client persona with that specific problem that ideally, again, you've validated is the most pressing problem. We offer specific solution, the core solution. You also don't want to talk about all the specific sub-solutions that you have, but really what's the core solution that's most relevant to that problem. And different from specific alternative solutions, we actually have a unique advantage because insert reason to believe. So really it's the core reason people should trust your credibility. This is one example of a formula. And again, I'm going to share the slide deck so you can take this and start to experiment for yourself. If you plug in the gaps for yourself, for your business, for one ideal persona versus another ideal persona, how would this actually transform? And this is really how you pitch yourself to them, right? And in order to actually craft your value proposition, that's the second section that we were just introduced to next to the jobs to be done exercise. We're starting to then ask ourselves, well, how can we start to think about our solution and what we're offering to them and how we can best communicate towards meeting those jobs to be done and meeting that empathy map? What is our value? So how does your product offering offer them value and cover the needs? And then finally, what is that unique advantage? And this is what's going to help you fill this out more confidently. So it's really, it's the formula that will give you something like that. This is not something that you have to follow religiously, by the way. This is really just an example of a formula. There's other types that you can use. But if you're stuck or if you're doing this again for the first time, it's often helpful to start with a formula like this. And so what's next? Once we actually define your ideal client persona, once you start to get into their bodies, into their feelings, into their heads and thinking, into their pain points, and you start to develop your value proposition. Well, that's what we were saying before is the time where you can start to actually validate. You can start to set hypothesis statements and you can start to systemically set up user interviews, literally go up to someone in the street and ask them, do you have 15 minutes if that is your ideal user, and be like, do you have 15 minutes for coffee? I'd love to ask some structured questions for my project that I'm doing. And doing that kind of on a systemic approach, right? And really looking at least 10 people from one ideal client segment. So we like to always say validation is always better than assuming. This is also a great communication tip in general, with relationships in general, or that's at least one core belief of mine, is if you can validate something, then you just better validate it than assume it. Apologies about my cough, by the way. And so this goes back to how do we actually validate? First of all, it's adopting this mindset from Lean Startup 101, right? How can we adopt this learn, build, and measure mindset and really look at this as a bit of an experiment, a bit of a way we can test and pivot and test and pivot until we find that right ideal client persona, until we find the right triggers, the right problems, the right needs. And it really consists of 3 simple steps. Planning it by really focusing on the key hypotheses that you want to start to validate, creating your interview or data collection sheet. So actually writing up the different questions that you're going to be asking and maybe creating a space for yourself to actually put down those questions. A simple spreadsheet would do. Number 2 is to test. So actually run A/B test, whether that's through ads that you launch and you want to see which audiences are, resonating with what type of message, or it's actually running user interviews, as I mentioned. So literally, asking at least 10 to 20, maybe 30 people if they would have time in the next 1 or 2 months for a quick virtual coffee. Usually wouldn't take longer than 15, 20 minutes. Or if it's a local business, you can obviously just, ask them for a quick 15 or 20 minutes of their time, go on a walk, ideally record it because you want to have a track record of it. That's why virtual sometimes can be even easier in that way. And then finally, it's to analyze and gather the insights. And this is really a cycle that can be repeated month or bi-monthly after bi-monthly until you can get a better sense. Am I confident with my ideal client persona? And am I confident around what matters to them? What is that context that's most relevant to me and how I can best personalize my messaging and my offering towards them? And that's it for session 2. Here's just the key insights again and takeaways from what we talked about today. And even just talking through this or going through this once or twice, but even mentioning where you're at in the stage to investors usually can really strengthen your position because it helps, again, show confidence in helping them understand, okay, you're going through a process and you're at this stage and this is things that you've already validated, but you're also aware what you haven't validated around. And yet you're also not putting a lot of energy into a lot of different personas whilst actually never ever validating things because it just feels a bit overwhelming. The homework / additional exercise is just actually really simply helping you to start reflect around your core hypotheses. And really these are based off, like I said, the jobs to be done based off the empathy map. what are the 3, 4, 5 key hypotheses that you're making or assumptions that you're making that actually matter the most for that ideal client persona? And it might start with, I believe that this specific niche or segment is more likely to want to engage with this specific solution. So that's even level 1, starting to think about this niche over that niche. Another level you can think about it is, well, within this specific niche, we believe that those specific pain points, 1 and 2, matter the most for them. And the more specific you can be with those hypothesis questions, the better you're set up to collect the right data. Maybe one last step on this is that when you write the hypothesis statement, it's always good to remember or think about, what am I trying to validate here? So how can I actually get data to help me put a yes or no into this? So if I can't make a clear yes or no, then my hypothesis statement is maybe needing a bit of refinement. Any questions? Again, this is just a bit of extra, the next steps. I would advise you to go back to whatever the exercises that we actually did today first, though, because that's going to prompt you up to actually create those hypothesis statements effectively.
I have one question, please. So my question is, so when you are creating your persona, because for now I just have one product, okay? But in the not long future, but at least one year, 2 years, I would like to introduce more products to my brands. So how do I proceed regarding the persona? Should I just focus on the product I'm selling now, or do I need to think about like the brand globally and where I would like to go in order to be, because my persona is not right, is right for now, but it's not right for my brand in even 6 or 7 months. So that's mean 6 or 7 months I will need to do the same work again regarding the persona. So I would like to know in this case how I can put myself in the mid. I don't know if it's possible, but like in the way I would be able to navigate. I don't know. Do you see what I'm trying to explain?
Yeah. So maybe that brings us back to one point that we were talking about before. So it's not always about who you're excluding in your messaging and marketing and communications versus including. Sometimes it's who you're prioritizing versus who you're including versus who you're excluding. So what that means is you might have a conflict, and actually you need to make sure that 2 of those personas are being served, right? Because you have one that's maybe more relevant in 6 months' time and the other that's more relevant now. My recommendation is you make sure it's still friendly to both of them, but you prioritize one over the other. So you, in your head, you recognize one is more important for me to personalize my messaging, for example, compared to another.
Okay.
So what does that mean? That means maybe in your website landing page or on your social media when people first arrive, you're directly addressing the main persona, but you're making sure within the text that you're not excluding the other one. But the first one takes priority, if that makes sense.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
And it's also really okay to stack it up. So to say, for now, this is the priority, but later that will become the priority. It's just important for you to understand how much time does your marketing actually require, right? So if you're needing that new persona in 6 months, does it actually mean changing things now is how long it will take for you to connect with them over the next 6 months? And if so, then it's a good enough reason to say, okay, I need to switch now because my existing clients are actually enough for the next few months, and now I'm already starting to work on that next 6 months kind of timeline.
I see. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
My pleasure. Any other questions? And really here we're zooming out, and any questions regards anything that we discussed today or even from the last session. Just as a quick heads up, the next session is going to be facilitated by my co-founder Lee, and it's going to be around building a strong business/financial model and defining your ideal investor profile. So really starting to think about types of investors we're thinking about, our funders, as well as how we can make sure we have the business, confidence around communicating our business and finance model.
So I've got a question. So like this, that's our last session, right? So last session we're basically talking about kind of like strategy and like the future plans and stuff. And then I think one of the questions I had is like, because one of the big problems I have, right, is that like, we tend to plan well for 6 months. Sometimes, and sometimes, like so for example, we also tend to have like, we're going to a conference in X amount of time. We can plan up to that, but like it's kind of like a hill. You're going up the hill, you don't know what's going to be on the other side of the hill. So do you have any advice? Because those frameworks are really good for planning, but I think they tend not to deal very well with uncertainty, and then a lot of what we do as a startup is uncertainty. So do you have any tips around that, or is it just use them to give you an idea of where to head and then adjust as you go along?
What do you mean by use them? That last bit you said, can you
Oh,
that?
so I think they are useful for like giving you a direction, but what I find a lot of times is like the direction's like here, and then we get over the hill, and then we realize that that's not the right direction. We need to change paths, if it makes sense.
Yeah. And when you're saying around direction, are we talking about ideal client personas, or are we talking
Oh
about...
no, so it was based off the last session where we were talking about the strategy tools. So we basically talked about several strategy tools, which is kind of like your oh my god, having your like your, I can't remember what they're called, like the top level goal, your mission statement, and then also the framework that's used by charities for, like, I can't remember what that framework's called.
Theory of change.
Yes, theory of change. Yes.
What I would advise is usually at the start, by the way, of every startup, it's very common that you actually need to change that more frequently. So usually as you mature, the less frequently you should be updating and changing the core elements, at least, of your strategy, right? And something like your theory of change or the core systemic problem you're approaching, or as you mature, that should become more and more something that you're grounding yourself in and don't have to change as frequently. It doesn't mean that you never change it, but it's just the frequency gets less.
Okay.
So that's something maybe that's even you can bring up, is what I would suggest with your maybe co-founders or team, is like, how often do we want to change it, and how often have we been changing it? And has it maybe been feeling too much? Because that's maybe the sense that I'm getting. Usually, for a startup that's anything like plus minus 5 years, we would recommend for you to revisit your theory of change, your core essence, purpose statement, at least once a year. Ideally once a year. When it comes to what is the content that you're going to schedule out, and what are the core events that you're going to plan, and that's maybe something you can be a bit more fluid with. So you can even start to discuss, well, what is the levels of the strategy that we need to be a bit more stable with, and when are we going to refresh that, and how can we have a system for refreshing that, and how are we going to be more flexible? So if I decide I want to be able to post a random social media post because there's this trend happening tomorrow, I should be able to be free to do that, right? And that's okay, actually. But it kind of has to be aligned with our core essence, and it needs to make sure that it's not going against it. So this is almost introducing this concept of decision making in different nested systems, or in different levels of strategy. So what I would recommend there is to have those conversations with your team, right? How often are we changing the strategy? And are there elements that we want to decide not to change as frequently versus other elements that we can have more freedom and play with, right? And can we get closer to that at least once a year? And if it's not once a year, then why? Let's at least discuss that. Why are we changing our direction so often? Is it maybe because that we're purely driving opportunity, and then the question is that then the best recipe for long-term sustained growth and success? Or should we maybe try to understand what's going to also motivate us long-term the most, and make sure that it's aligned with our core values, for example? And again, core values change, right? So it's okay if they change after a year or two, or even after 6 months. It's just like, how can we make a system that's not spontaneous change every few weeks, right?
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
By the way, this is also very relevant to hypothesis testing in general, right? Hypothesis testing and doing these loops of validation is also pretty experimental and can be very hectic and wild, and it's like, oh, you're doing one thing 1 month and then, but actually if you take it in a much more systemic approach, so think about it as a process that you're following, it's just a simple loop, and in the bigger scheme of things, you're actually just getting closer to where you're needing to get, it becomes less overwhelming. You know, these coming 2 months, that's what I'm testing. The next 2 months, that's what I'm testing. The next 2 months, that's what I'm testing. And every bit of testing can help me refine my overall positioning and strategy and give me more confidence. So it doesn't all have to be at once, and it doesn't all have to like happen at the same time. It's like stacking it up and seeing it as a long-term process than as one final out like end goal that I'm going to reach in the next few months. Any other questions or reflections? And I'm just seeing also the time. So maybe if no one has any more questions, we could maybe even just finish things off by a quick circle of what are the key takeaways, and you can even pull back things from last session or anything from today that you're wanting to take away, maybe wanting to reflect more about, maybe wanting to spend a bit more time over the next few days and maybe journaling or thinking more about as well. Someone, whoever wants to unmute can start, and then you can pass the ball. You'll have the first privilege of choosing the next one.
So I go. So for me, so takeaway is to work more on my persona and to be able to define it better. And yes, so Naya, if you want to go next.
Thanks, girl. I think my takeaway today, the standout point for me is the questionnaire bit. I feel like I have a large user base of which I think is my ideal customer. So I think if I can get some of those in the hot seat, I think that's going to help me understand that gray area that I came up with earlier on, that piece that I just kind of couldn't understand. And I think before I fill it with my version, I think I want to understand the majority's version first, instead of driving it in something that would solve my unique problem as opposed to solving the mass. So that's my takeaway for today. I'm going to throw it to Stacey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my takeaway is it's more of a reflection from today's session. When I started my business, none of these core values, none of these statements, none of these things that we guys talking about now, I don't have in place for my business. So my question is, I always say you should just start when you're starting your business. My question is that something bad? Is that something good? That I don't have none of these in place now because I'm just learning all of these stuff.
I think it's not good or bad. I think it's just being aware of what you are doing and aren't doing is really where I'll take that from. Really, if you're already running your business, then you're probably also doing a lot more than you think you're strategically doing, right? So it sounds like you're intrinsically doing those stuff maybe without even documenting them, which is also a lot of the cases. A lot of businesses do that as well. So what I've been going through today is just a more formalized way of doing things. But I would actually doubt that you're not actually intrinsically emitting some core values that people are perceiving anyways, right?
No. I don't understand that one. Say that one again.
So really what I was saying is like how you position yourself, for example, is how you express what you do to someone asking what you do, right? So I'm thinking, yes, you might not have things that we discussed formally written down yet, and I see that as an opportunity to actually, you're sitting on opportunity to improve on, but it seems like actually what you're doing is already working. So you're probably already subconsciously doing some of the stuff that, we were discussing today. So I'd just maybe take it more with a hint of salt and see that as more of an opportunity. And I love how you're taking it with a, open learning mindset.
Yeah, that you're right with that one. I think that's what happened. I think that I'm doing it, but it's not recorded or it's not formulated as you're saying. So I think that's today was very, very helpful. Or the sessions to begin with has been very helpful.
Thank you so much for your reflection.
Yeah. Should I
You
pick
can-
David or someone
Yeah,
else?
go for it.
That's what Chris? So I said David.
Yeah, I can go. So for me, I think the two reflections for me, one's the persona grid, so that was really good, and like having to think about what they say, and then that was pretty good. And then the other one is like the key assumptions. So think about, I think we've got to a stage where we've got like a good definition in them. So maybe it's what revisiting some of those assumptions because they are assumptions. So yeah.
Awesome.
I think there's one last person left, right? Max.
Max, yeah.
Hello, yes. Probably should be maybe revisiting the personas. Could been in business 10 years. Maybe I could revisit them. Talking about recency, maybe we're due for it.
10 years sounds about right. Thank you so much. Just a key reflection from my end, I guess, is that there isn't, again, a right or wrong way to do this. These are just, again, tools that I just want to remind everyone that you can use as a way to help you gain confidence. And then also there's, it's not as black and white. This can change over time. But I think as long as you use these tools, to use it as a continuous way to refine your positioning, refine your messaging, refine your offering, that's something that can only mean it's a way of improvement. And it's not like you're doing something wrong now or right later on. But with that, thank you so much for your attention and time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, like I said, next week, Lee's going to be taking over. So I'm probably not going to see you for another couple of weeks. So thanks already for the first 2 sessions. I really appreciate your energy and focus.
Thank you very much as well. It's been great.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Good evening.